Leach, who is an architect in SBTU, and he will be talking about.
It's been a while since I've seen some of you. I recognize a lot of faces.
I'll get out of the way and let him chat.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about Longhorn client security, or I'm going to talk about highlights of Longhorn client security. If we get through enough time, I have a slide that's got dozens and dozens and dozens of things that we're doing incrementally in all sorts of corners. But I don't think that's probably what you really want to hear. So the first thing we're going to talk about is customer feedback that drove a lot of our decisions, and then I'm going to divide the talking into 4 chunks. Things that we're doing to the process to improve the end product, things we're doing in the area of isolation and resiliency, security management, and then stuff we're doing in the area of the gold standard, and then I'll sum up at the end. So, so the feedback is, of course, that there's constantly an increasing number of hackers, viruses, and malware, and more recently the threat of organized crime taking advantage of flaws in our software in order to make hay of one kind or another. That patching is a continual problem and takes too much time and resources. That there's a cost to the lost productivity and the downtime, and we can't fix that by just crippling the operating system and making it do nothing. It still needs to be able to do the things that it could do before. And so the numbers on this are that security vulnerabilities have increased the desktop TCO by about $200 a year, or 4%. So that when you multiply that by a billion machines, that adds up to a little money. As Ed Dirksen used to say, a billion here, a billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money. What we want to do is try and get Longhorn so that it is a little bit less impactful along this line. So here are these 4 security pillars, and what we're really and I'm not even going to go through the slide at this level, just to say that there are these 4, and I will talk about each of them in turn. So we have what we call the security development lifecycle, and if we have any real questions about this, Steve Lipner here is the.
I heard more about that than I wanted last meeting. So
okay.
But you can still beat on me, not you, for that.
Right. So the life cycle includes things like threat modeling for known and projected threats. We build the reviews, security reviews, into the schedule so that there's definite time where everybody pauses, thinks hard about security, and then returns. But there's also a few bullets down, you see training and guidance for the development team on writing secure code. So hopefully they've been thinking about it because they've been trained all along. We do more penetration testing. We have tools that scan the code. We annotate the code. That's new in Longhorn, although there was some use of it before. But the major use of it to annotate the code so that you can do better cross-procedural analysis, code coverage requirements for the tests that you run before you're allowed to check in, which increase every milestone so that people get better and better, and a whole list of banned APIs that have been proven in the past to have a higher likelihood of introducing bugs when they're used. So we do all those things. Isolation and resiliency. We have 2 major areas that we're going after here. First of all, we're using the trusted processor module that comes in some new hardware to enable the system to start up and run in a known good state. So the way that the TPM can guarantee that the loader that initially runs on the bootloader has not been tampered with. And it also can then release to that bootloader a key, which we can use to do full volume encryption, so that it's difficult to tamper with the whole operating system and the registry when it's offline in such a way that it will cause anything useful to result afterwards, other than vandalism. Then once the operating system is up, there's code integrity, which checks all Windows system code, which has to be signed, and checks the integrity of each file on load. So the combination of these things ends up with a system that has desirable properties, like if you steal it, then the information on it is going to be much more secure. And then the other thing, a major thing, is limited accounts, so that most of the time you don't have to run as an administrator. And when you do run as an administrator, there's a secure transition from running as an ordinary user to running as an administrator. And I will talk about both of these in a little bit more detail. So the Trusted Processor module is a hardware facility that can do those two things that I said. It can verify the integrity of images and release keys to those images after their integrity has been ensured. And that gives you the ability to handle each of these three things right here. The requirements for that are that they have the new TPM version 1.2 hardware standard installed. They have a particular BIOS and extensible firmware interface, which is defined by an organization called the Trusted Computing Group, which is the guys that are setting the standards for all of this hardware stuff so that it's uniformly available across all the hardware manufacturers. And these chipsets are supposed to be available in the second half of 05, and the laptops available with them starting in the first half of 06, which means that they're going to be available in time for Longhorn. Now, limited user accounts, as I said, the idea is that if we limit the need for and the usage of administrator privilege, then if you happen to download and run some malware or it sneaks by you somehow or other, the chances of the operating system itself, the integrity of the OS being damaged, will be decreased. This turns out to be one of the major ways. If the integrity of the operating system is preserved, then damage can be done to your own files, but the operating system itself, you aren't going to have to completely clean your disk and reload from scratch and then get your files from hopefully a backup that you have somewhere. You're going to just have to get your files from a backup that you hopefully have somewhere. But you'll be able to use the operating system tools. So basically what happens is the time to recover in the case of a bad event gets reduced. There also, we'll see that we think that a lot of you're going to not have as much chance to get screwed up in the first place. So we have even operators normally operate as with ordinary user privileges. There's a special user experience for allowing the administrator to run an application at the administrator level within a limited user session, and that's both their session and somebody else's session. I'll show some slides of how that UX works in a second. And in order to get old applications, and one of the major problems with this whole approach is that old applications sometimes gratuitously need administrative privileges. Especially when you lock down the system. So we have a technique for virtualizing the file and registry so that they get copy on write versions of the things that they needed to write that required administrator privilege before, so that they can run without administrator privilege. And we believe that we'll get a large number of the legacy applications to work in this mode. So when somebody comes along, let's say, and wants to do an install of some software that they've downloaded, and they start to run the application, and they're limited users, so we know that they won't be able to do the install, you get a pop-up. And they say, do you want to install the application? And it tells you a bunch of stuff about why you may or may not want to install applications. If you're surprised by the fact that something wants to install, then you should probably not proceed. And then you're prompted for credentials that have permission to do the install. So this works two ways. One is, it might be that Abby's son wants to install a game. And instead of having to log out and let Abby log in and then do the install, Abby can just come in, and we call this the over-the-shoulder credential entry, can enter her credentials into this dialog, and then the thing installs. And then her son, Toby, gets to go on and play the game. So it's a minimal disruption to the workflow, thus encouraging her to not give Toby the admin privilege all the time.
Toby now knows her password.
If Toby is really desirous of becoming an administrator, then yeah.
Toby surely is after having had this experience.
Possibly.
It's more likely Toby will be the
And then there are also, besides installing software, right, the other things that administrators do typically is go out and configure various security settings on the machine. We wanted to enable ordinary users to be able to look at the security settings on the machine, but not necessarily be able to change them. So the user experience you get with that is, up comes the dialog box with all the information on it, but the appropriate things are grayed out, say the firewall in this case. If you want to change them, then you click on the unlock button at the bottom. You get the same sort of credential entry experience, and the user experience people tell us that getting this experience, the same every time is important. You enter them, then the credentials are now not grayed out, and the configuration settings are not grayed out. You can change them and proceed onward. Okay. So the other areas that we're looking at in the area for isolation and resilience are improving the trustworthiness of the browser and adding other additional resiliency against malware attacks. We're hardening all of the Windows services that we can using a limited token, running on what we call a limited token, so that they can be set up with only a set of allowed actions, and that any attempt to break out of that set of allowed actions will be caught. And we're doing some work in the spyware detection and cleaning, which you may have seen. We have a beta of that already out. So the browser. We've discovered that the IE vulnerabilities are sort of evenly distributed between certain core code paths, like file download and script engine, and vulnerable extensibility points like ActiveX. And then more general security bugs like buffer overflows, which happen all over the place. In XPSP2, we addressed the most dangerous abuses of these by what we called LMZL, which means local machine zone lockdown. So that if you could somehow manage to get a script downloaded to your local machine zone, in other words, on your local hard drive, it wouldn't be able to run with full privilege. It did not address all the vulnerability classes. The enhancements that we're proposing will target all the known remaining threats that we have. The main ActiveX repurposing, meaning that you got an ActiveX control from one site, and it was marked as safe for scripting, and then it got used. It wasn't really safe for scripting, and it gets used by another site in an unsafe way. Bugs in URL parsing, where it wasn't uniform all over the place, and it was in half-parsed states between, as it passed around the system, and it just ended up being very difficult to guarantee that things were working correctly when people sent in malformed inputs. Cross-domain information disclosure issues, drag and drop issues, and buffer overflows. It will also have some more visible protections in an improved SSL user experience, so that there will be some anti-phishing capability to tell you when you're perhaps disclosing information to a place that you shouldn't, and tools that will let you enhance your privacy by clearing your browsing history and being able to in advance say that you want to run without leaving any tracks. So we're going to run IE with limited permissions so that it reduces the attack surface. Some of the things like the URL parsing are being centralized to simplify the architecture so that you don't have as large a chance of exploits there. And there's another button that says reset this to factory settings, so that if you believe that something has happened to your IE that you don't know what, you can just press a button and get back to the known good initial state. The other thing that happens that causes IE to your experience to be not satisfactory is that either spyware or even in well-intentioned but badly written extensions to the browser cause everything to get messed up, either unreliable or slow. So anytime any extension is requested for IE, the user is going to get notified. You'll be able to go back to a safe mode where you can run without any extensions at all. We're going to attempt to detect unreliable and slow add-ons and disable them with an easy way of discovering what's been disabled so that you can put it back if you want. Those are going to make the browser experience more satisfactory. Then for attempting to protect private information, There's going to be mechanisms that, for example, highlight the sites that you've said are secure and tell you if you're sending personal data over in the clear. If there's suspicious behavior, don't ask me exactly what it thinks is suspicious behavior, but you'll get notified. If you're browsing, we'll be working with people who identify known spyware sites, and you'll be able to be warned when you browse there. And then I already talked a little bit about the no tracks and one-click cleanup, so that you can say, I don't want to leave any tracks about where I've been when I'm using this browser, and I can quickly clean up everything that the browser has learned about me in this session by just clicking on a button. We acquired an anti-spyware company, as you may know, and we're going to be including some of the technology from that in the system. So the next pillar is security management. In that area, we have these 4 items, what we call network access.
Are we going to internalize the work of tracking the virus signatures and updating that, or is that going to be outsourced?
I don't know where we're going to get the...
Jason Garbage is talking later about our antivirus strategy, so he may have a better idea of what that's going to wind up entailing.
So we have what we call the network access protection. Some people have previously called it quarantine, so that when you bring a laptop in from the outside, say you've been traveling for a couple of weeks, you connect it to the network, before it's allowed to actually talk to anybody or anybody's allowed to talk to it, you will an agent on that machine will attempt to examine it, see whether or not it's got all the appropriate patches and policy downloaded to it. It will be able to talk to servers within its little quarantine network, get itself all the patches, get itself all the appropriate policy, and only after that process has been done, then it will be able to get a key ensconced in a certificate that enables it to talk to the rest of the network. This is notes here that this is dependent on having services that were going to come with Longhorn Server. There will be technology that reduces the cost of patching by reducing the number of reboots. First by technology that we call hot patching, so that it can patch things while they're still running, and the restart manager, which can cycle services in such a way as to that are in use in such a way as to not require that the whole system be shut down.
So, Paul, is it thought that if everybody inside of, say, Microsoft was using this, that all the viruses that are in the internal networks would just sort of die?
Well, the ones that are already there, that doesn't do anything for.
Wouldn't they get rid of them by running a virus checker on each machine during the quarantine period?
You mean at the point when we're doing this for internal connect as well, for hardwired connect?
For hardwired connection.
Stuff on each machine in the company, presumably it goes through all of this before it enters the cell phone.
Right.
Is that the intention, to get that good of a coverage?
I guess I haven't thought hard about whether or not it would actually accomplish that, but I mean, we already have, the thing is we already require people to install all the patches. And we scan for the patch. The technology we use today internally is go around and scan all the machines and figure out what their patch state is. Okay, these are the ones that are already by IPsec allowed to be on the internal network, and then shut off your network port if you aren't. So this seems like a more automated way of accomplishing that, but doesn't seem like it would necessarily make things any better.
Microsoft is a more challenging environment, I think, than real companies, because we have less managed machines and much, everybody's admin, because we need to sort of constantly be replacing the operating systems, etc., and the wide variation of versions and configurations. So I found with Microsoft harder to do this on. If we could get close in our environment, I think that the average company would probably be in very good shape.
Within the IPsec protected subnetwork, I believe that we're probably pretty virus-free today. It's just that if you started putting a scanner on the net, you would see all sorts of virus-induced injected packets flowing around all the time, because there are lots of unmanaged machines actually physically attached to the network. And what that means is if there's ever an instant in which you're not protected behind your IPsec shield, you could be vulnerable. I guess the answer is yes and no. Once you get your shield up, it's going to be pretty virus-free. If you look outside the shield boundary, then you probably still see lots of virus traffic flowing around.
Sorry, I should know this, but that key you talked about before that gets you out of jail, will let you get on the network, is that an IPsec key?
Yes.
So it's enforced by IPsec policy?
That's right. It's the IPsec. You get an IPsec certificate and key that enables you to get on the rest of the network. Okay. And I guess there's a client-based security scanning agent that goes along with the network access protection that does the reporting of your security configuration and your patch status and other health information. And it utilizes the Windows Update agent for the patch status. So we're not introducing yet another component that tries to figure out what your patch status is. Another thing that people have requested is the ability to control whether or not you can bring in a USB flash drive and load it up, either load software off of it or load it up with stuff that you're not supposed to take out. So we'll be including that kind of thing. And along with the IPsec capabilities being used for the network access protection, the IPsec people who sort of know the internal system knew that there were about 5 different ways of setting TCP/IP filters in the past. So we're going to integrate the IPsec and firewall management together so that, in fact, there will only be one way of setting all the IP filtering, whether it's cryptographically protected or not. So that should make it easier to manage. And in the area of sort of parental controls, which may also apply in some corporate scenarios, the ability to do content filtering, figure out who you're allowed to contact with email and instant messaging, when you're allowed to use the machine, how long you're allowed to use the machine, and reporting of that kind of information. The next pillar area is authentication, authorization, and audit, or the gold standard. We have a bunch of different things that we're doing in each of those areas. So in authentication, we're going to make it possible to more broadly use your smart card so that you don't have to rely on the basis of security being a password. So the encrypted file system and the rights management system, the keys that today are software private keys protected by your password, will be able to be hardware private keys protected by your smart card. Also, being able to more easily deploy and self-service these your smart cards so that it's cheaper and more practical to deploy a smart card infrastructure and replace passwords. We've re-architected the subsystem we call WinLogon, which is the subsystem that you talk to when you initially authenticate yourself to the system. So it's made extensible so that we can put in what we call credentials providers, and these credential providers can add new authentication mechanisms like biometrics. We don't ship any biometrics credential providers today because we don't think that we can do a good enough job of making them really secure, and that the hardware isn't really to the point that the widely available hardware isn't to the point that it's trustworthy enough as a complete replacement. But people will make add-ons in that area, and as an additional authentication factor, they probably make sense. And all of this re-architecture will give you a unified user experience for all of your credential entry. We're improving the underlying crypto support. We've gotten lots of requests from government-type entities that they want to be able to replace our cryptography, either because they don't have confidence in it or because they think that they have a better algorithm that they want to use. So we're doing that. And also, as we've seen with the breaks in SHA and other algorithms, it may be necessary to be algorithm agile and replace algorithms on the fly. So this is underlying support that will make that more possible. The public key infrastructure, it's right now a little difficult. If you use lots of computers, you'll notice that you tend to accumulate lots and lots and lots of certificates, many of which are for the same purpose. So the infrastructure has got what we call has got roaming support. The DIMS is its acronym. Lynn, what's DIMS?
Digital Identity Management.
Digital Identity Management System, so that even if you don't have a roaming profile that roams hundreds of megabytes of stuff around with you, you can roam your few kilobytes worth of certificates and private keys easily to all of your machines. And then we're working on mechanisms by which people can exchange certificates and keys with other people and establish peer-to-peer trust. Lastly, for the home network, it's been noticed that more and more people have a small network of computers in their own home, and it's a pain to be able to synchronize the passwords and accounts between them. And so we have something we call the castle technology that will replicate your account and authentication information for small groups, easily for small groups of people, and make it a lot more friendly to use a collection of machines. In the area of authorization, we have something already shipping called the Authorization Manager, which does role-based access control, and we're going to be improving the support for that, making things like making policy storage more flexible and more usable on a larger scale, and in improving the control that you have over role definitions and role assignments. We have capabilities of defining roles by executing queries against the Active Directory, and if the query succeeds, then you're in that role. Web services support. The product called Indigo supports web services security, so that you can do web services based on either passwords or Kerberos or X5R9 or the SAML standard, and it has mechanisms for being very flexible about who you trust, what claims you're willing to, what properties about entities you're willing to accept from which issuers, and authorization based on those claims. We're improving the audit mechanisms by allowing finer-grained audit policy control. So they're introducing this notion of subcategories. The subcategories you can use to decide what events you're actually going to collect, so that you can only collect the ones that are of interest to you. We're schematizing all the information so that it will be easier to analyze. And there's the Microsoft Audit Collection System called MAX, which will quickly and securely move the security events off of a local machine onto an audit collector machine out in the network, where it will be under control of the audit function of your organization, so that it's less possible for the administrators to tamper with the audit collection. So one of the primary functions of it is to enable an auditor-administrator role separation. The auditors are supposed to be keeping watch on the guardians that guard the guardians, so they need to be not affectable by the administrators. It protects the audits every way, entirely on the way from the security log all the way to the collection database. You can do real-time analysis and forensic analysis across multiple machines, because we're collecting like thousands and thousands of machines' audit information in one place, so that it's easy to analyze there for patterns that occur across different machines. And the agent itself, the collection agent, is very lightweight and suitable to be run on every workstation, so that it doesn't impose much of a performance cost to be run there. And it sort of looks like the following picture, that we've got the monitored servers or workstations on the left. They feed all of their information into a collector, so it gets off the machine very quickly, so where it's subject to tampering. Once it gets on the collector, it's completely under control of the auditors. This machine doesn't even have to be administered by the regular administrators. And it's not, can be not in your own in the same domain. From there, it can go into a SQL database where you analyze it. It can be fed into real-time intrusion detection systems, and it can be fed into a management system along with other events that you're collecting to be able to analyze operational characteristics of the system. So, summary. Lots of new security improvements. Is particularly focused on controlling damage caused by hackers and malicious software, somewhat improve the protection for your privacy, and help you easily secure your computers while you're on your corporate network, at home, at work, and while traveling. That was pretty. So we have plenty of time for discussion. I also have backup slides that we can go through to go in more detail, as I said. Yes?
So you've got a lot of requirements here. Can you build this thing? You've complicated testing, you've complicated development. It seems to me that it's called Longhorn because it's going to take a long time to do all this. Is there a short horn in here?
There is.
They've been riding this Longhorn for a couple years now already.
Right. Yes, I think there's not going to be any short horn, otherwise there'll never be a Longhorn.
But seriously, I mean, this is a lot of work to do.
It's relatively
complicated testing effort for all of this.
Well,
can you just kind of talk about the size of this effort, the number of people you have doing this, your shift schedule, and give me some confidence that this is going to get done?
I think I'm probably not the person to try and convince you of that. I didn't bring a schedule. It's supposed to ship in May of 2006. So far, the Beta 1 we have two major milestones, Beta 1 and Beta 2, and the Beta 1 milestone people seem to be is soon, and people are checking in the code, and we're doing it incrementally. Groups integrate their stuff into a system, and it gets working on an incremental basis. Which is different than we used to do, where there used to be sort of a free-for-all check-in into one main development the code base. And the system seems to be, on a week-by-week basis, both working and incrementally improving. Steve, do you want to try and? You don't want to try and tackle. And the other thing is, some of this stuff is the work is in order to simplify the architecture of the system. So there's investment in doing that. And that tends to make the testing and development job easier, not harder. It also tends to improve the quality. Every time that we go and touch old code and do a major rewrite of it, the code quality, because all of the security development lifecycle, code quality goes up by an amazing amount. And so that's a good.
From a vulnerability perspective, you'd like the. This sounds like a bizarre thing to say, and it's definitely under your non-disclosures, but from a vulnerability perspective, you'd like the code churn for Longhorn to be 100%.
The code
churn. How much of it changed?
How much got replaced?
So that was what I wanted to follow up on. How much old code is going to be in Longhorn, and in that I know there are vulnerabilities in old code that have not been repaired, and how much of that is going to end up in Longhorn.
So, I guess one thing I would say is that what we call the quality gates that everybody has to pass do not respect whether or not you're old code or new code. All right. So,
and we have
from that standpoint, it does not make any difference.
And we have reserved the security push in Longhorn, in the Longhorn schedule, and the question we've gone back and forth on, we're doing all this stuff during the development process. Why do we need a security push? Turns out the security push is the additional time to invest in the legacy code that was undertouched or untouched through the process. One of the benefits we are getting, Longhorn, and I don't even know whether we told you this, but Longhorn is being built on the server code base, not the XP code base, which is a benefit. So it's already what went through the 2002 security push.
But your security, your gates are not zero vulnerabilities. You have gates which allow vulnerabilities to get through that you think are not important or something like that.
Well,
as I recall.
Let
me just finish.
And
I believe, so this view that having a set of gates, the same gates should apply for all code, seems practical.
It's necessary but not sufficient.
But what I was going to say is I believe that today you probably build better code because of what's happened in the company in the last couple of years than you did before, and better by construction is going to pass more gates, even ones you're not asking for, than better by getting it through the gates. And therefore, I'm still wary of code that's older.
Me too.
That makes sense, but so what?
I mean, one thing I will note is that putting in the annotations in order to pass the prefix tests causes code that would otherwise have been completely left alone to get touched. And then additionally, those annotations reduce the even though that old code was run through the code analysis before, because of the degree that you got false positives, right? That then required a human being to go look at it. And sometimes they would mistakenly triage away real bugs. Now the bugs that are reported are much more accurate, and there's less excuse for a human being to say, well, I'll just blow this off, it can't happen. So there can be more scrutiny on the legacy code for both of those reasons.
For the new code, what parts are being written in managed code and which are not, and how is that being decided?
There's no managed code in. Nothing that anything else calls, right? So no, none of this stuff is going to be managed.
But you didn't answer. I mean, you segued away from my question. Sorry, you didn't answer. Martine was a fine fellow, but to answer, I mean, the so what question is, Longhorn is a quote new system as far as the rest of the world is concerned. So that is, your customer base is going to see this as the first real system since Microsoft discovered trustworthiness. In the server and all the other Windows things, you got a lot of slack because you had a legacy code base. In theory, you have no legacy code base in the mind of your customer when it comes to this. So they have a right, I think, to have a much higher standard of trustworthiness for this than anything in the past. And you, therefore, need to have a higher standard. So the reason I'm asking about how much old code and how many vulnerabilities are going to be left is I want to have an understanding of what the risk is. And I also want to have an understanding that you understand what the risk is by making these choices. And none of the answers I've heard have targeted that aspect of the problem. They've been of the form, well, we've got these gates and we're building code well, and that's good engineering practice, but how bad is it? Or could it be? Is somebody even asking that question and looking at it?
I'm not sure I'm responding to this in the same language that you're asking, Fred, but we are looking at that question. There will be legacy code. There will be code that was in T4 and has moved forward with relatively little change.
How much?
That is. Do you have any idea, Paul?
No, that would be.
Probably, I don't know, yes, 20%, but that's still maybe a lot.
That's my interpretation of Fred's question. How much old code?
Yeah, I think that would be, we don't know for sure.
John?
I mean, I think that we should actually stop being so defensive about this and say, yeah, this is actually a really good point. This is an extremely high risk area, and we should go back and make sure that we've got the measurements that make us confident in this.
Yeah, right.
This is my biggest worry about Longhorn. Okay, is exactly that legacy code. Okay, if we were building it from scratch with the practices that we have today, basically we'd shut down the MSRC. Okay, that would be my projection. The security response center.
Steve?
It'd be like the Maytag repairman.
Steve,
The other thing I got out of this was, given that the amount of old code is going to be more than 1%, it's probably not a good idea to market this as an all shiny new super secure system.
That was what I was just going to say.
Because it isn't.
Right.
And you're going to be found out.
I think already customers' expectations have been lowered because there's been all this hype about this Longhorn coming out, which we already know is not going to have the functionality. Then just if the customers expect, oh, it's not going to be the Longhorn as originally hyped, it's just going to be the next version of Windows, you have lowered your customers' expectations, but to the level that you can perhaps satisfy. This is not a good answer, but it's more realistic.
Okay, so there are different ways of looking at that. Okay, one of them, I think when you talk about lowered expectations and and so on, a lot of that was removing. A lot of features got pulled out of Longhorn. Okay, and they're out. So in that sense, we've lowered it. A lot of major new features. A lot of major new features got pulled out, and in that sense, we backed off some of the things that we were planning a year and a half ago. From what I think of as a real security or a security assurance perspective, this is still a trustworthy computing release. The SDL is mandatory. We are doing the things that we know how to do, which are basically the things that I talked to you about at the last meeting to try to remove vulnerabilities, including some new things that Paul talked about. Okay. Now where is my biggest concern? Fred put his finger on it. My biggest concern is legacy code. What do we do about that? Well, we try to compensate for the fact that it hasn't been touched by providing a security push period and being really aware of the fact that that's where our major emphasis has to be in terms of getting the reviews on those.
I think we're also doing. I'm sorry. We're also doing.
One thing. During the security push, you identified far more problems than you were able to repair. The last there were vulnerabilities that were deemed, well, it's not important enough to hold things up, and it would have taken forever.
But
could that happen again?
Are we going to get to perfection? No. Okay. We didn't identify. The primary area in which vulnerabilities were identified and then not fixed in the server security push was in components where there were client scenarios at issue. Okay. In other words, because it was a server, we said there are things that we don't have to address because it's a server. Okay. Longhorn doesn't have that excuse. Okay. And the bar was moderate. Okay, in other words, anything that hits MSRC, our severity rating system of moderate, the default is to fix it. Okay.
And for this, it will be similarly moderate.
The default will be moderate. Yeah, and we will not be blowing off. We will not be. As you get closer to release, post beta, then the bar goes up. Okay, but
which means there are more vulnerabilities shipped, more discovered vulnerabilities. So I know you can't do anything about the vulnerabilities you don't discover.
Right.
So perfection isn't the right thing.
Right.
It's relative to your detection capability,
right,
which is pretty good.
Right.
But there's another measure. It's also relative to what customers are running today and how they will perceive both Windows Server and the new.
Yeah.
The question is, do you market this as an improvement?
That's exactly.
Or do you market it as
it is an
all shiny new?
And a lot of customers respond to Windows 2003 by saying, oh, it's the first version of something new, so I'm going to stick with Windows 2000. It is demonstrably certain that 2003 Server is better and that those customers should update.
Okay, so could you put up your slide 2? The one that at the bottom says Longhorn Gold.
I stripped out nearly every other marketing accepting kind of slide. I guess I should have
Well, that, I mean,
gone
that
all
was
the
the
way.
The worst thing to say was that was marketing, because that's playing exactly into the argument that people are making, which is it may be being marketed wrong.
We continually on the tech try and make sure that I should just quit out of this. Let's see. Here we are.
So my question about this is.
Notice this said, however, it's the goal.
It's see, I wanted to ask, what is it? And in particular, how do you does this really determine whether this thing gets shipped, or is this a goal like pure living that people aspire to and it doesn't mean anything? Because if it determines how it gets shipped, then I'm curious what it really means. I don't know how to measure it, and I don't know when it gets gated. And if it's a goal and it gets publicized, I'm sure people are going to confuse the idea that it's a goal with it being a result, and that would be unfortunate.
Yes.
In fact, haven't we said Longhorn was the foundation to build on for the next 10 years? I mean, that's the sort of...
Right.
People used to build on cinder blocks when they were trying to cut costs. It doesn't seem that complex.
I mean,
stones. Yeah.
But I digress. Okay. So, Fred, I'm not the law. Legacy code is our my biggest single concern in Longhorn. That's why we've asked that the security push stay in, and it's stayed in. The reason why I keep harping on the security push thing, let me give you a glass half full comment, which I think is responsive. Okay, when I talked to you guys in about SDL last meeting, I think I probably talked not only about some server statistics, and I also talked about the Exchange and SQL statistics. In those cases, we did the security pushes on the legacy code base. Okay, there were service packs. It was not new development. It turns out that the results there, in the case of SQL, my favorite example, results have been so good that the database security finders have all fled to Oracle. Okay, they've just given up because it's not fun on SQL. So the process, even focusing on legacy code can be good enough.
Right. So, I don't want to prolong it. I will let you have the last word. But there are two issues on the table, and then I think we can probably move on. One is there's this issue that I share your fear about legacy code, and so you don't have to have nightmares by yourself at night anymore. The second is my concern about the fact that something that is enough to prevent shipment on some day, because it's moderate, 3 months later is not enough to prevent shipment because it's not severe, and the bar changes. And I just don't understand the game of what it is you're trying to ship, because there doesn't seem to be a real standard. There seems to be a bunch of trade-offs. And nobody ever articulates the trade-offs. Why is it okay for something to be severe the day before to be moderate the day before it's shipped, but not moderate 3 months before? I understand the commercial issue, but nobody's telling me what the security requirement is that lets you ship moderate things when they're discovered at one point and severe things at another.
I mean, the answer to that is, that as with every other aspect of shipping product, as we get closer to ship, we raise the bar a bit on what we'll accept.
Yeah,
The definition, I didn't say we raised past moderate. Okay, in other words, an important or a critical will still stop ship. And in terms of the definitions of those things, those are written down. I mean, you can look at them. In general, moderate, the thing that makes a vulnerability moderate is that there's some significant mitigation in the system that keeps it from affecting people. Okay.
Fred would be happier if we never worried about moderate. If we had a consistent standard, only worrying about severe. That's more or less what you said 3 minutes ago, but I'm sure that's not what you think.
No, I would be happier if you had a standard. Wait, I get the whole sentence, right? You have a standard in which you said what it is you expect to be shipping, and it would turn out that when things are moderate in the development cycle, they ought to be fixed in order to meet that standard on the day it ships. And the things that you could ship moderate things the day before because it still meets that standard, and the standard involves a trade-off not only between vulnerabilities, but between product delivery schedule and all this sort of thing.
We have that. You want it written down in weasel words?
I think that's what
it's not going to be quantitative.
I think what you said is what we do. Okay, but I'm not sure. I may have misunderstood you.
So the statement we can make is that it will ship with no important security vulnerabilities or critical security vulnerabilities.
That we know of.
Right. So from that standpoint, we make no promise about moderate ones.
And we can also state that it will ship with critical and important vulnerabilities that we don't know of. And that's.
I just don't understand what you're bitching about. I really don't.
Just wants a standard.
Standard is, if you want an absolute standard, it's don't ship with any vulnerabilities that are more than moderate.
Right.
But what is?
And what he's bitching about is that we actually worry about moderate vulnerabilities in an earlier stage, apparently. But I don't understand why that's something to bitch about.
Can we move on?
John?
Yeah. I mean, about the action items that you'd like to say about this. I heard that you want to hear more precisely what the standard is, how our response is changing during various phases. We wanted to hear the percentages of legacy code. And I think a good takeaway for us is, the risk that since there's substantial amounts of legacy code, even with the additional focus that we're doing, that this is a risk that we should consider in the overall positioning and marketing of that. And Scott is probably the right person to be communicating that, since they don't actually ask me about marketing.
They ask me, as it turns out.
And my last little comment that I was going to say before is that I think we're actually, a lot of the things we're doing are going to force people to look at legacy code. The code coverage metric, the fact that we do fuzz testing, the fact that we put in security annotations, those are, to get your code coverage metric up high enough, you're probably going to have to run some tests that find some bugs, and the bugs are going to have to be fixed. The fuzz testing is going to find some more bugs, and the bugs are going to have to be fixed. So as before, where some code just managed to sneak through without ever really being seriously examined, we're doing some things that are going to force that code to get looked at. And looking at it is a lot better than not having to look at it. So,
Peter? This is a different topic. I don't know. Is you following up on the same topic?
No, it's a different topic.
I'm actually following up. I just had, could you remind me what classifies something as a severe vulnerability versus a moderate one?
Moderate.
You can use examples.
There's a system on the web. Okay. Yeah. It's a public document, and we can send you the link. Critical is worm propagation without user action. Important is CIA, confidentiality, integrity, or availability consequence, typically in the default configuration. Moderate is protected by default configuration or objectively hard to do. Those are sort of the informal summary.
So at a default level, you wouldn't experience this problem.
That's right. Or it's really hard to exploit. And the hard to exploit changes over time, of course, but in general we've had reasonable stability. And that's all documented, not at lawyer level detail, but public.
So I have a question about Castle, which is the first I've heard about it, and in particular, is connection to the broadcast flag regulations from the FCC. I have no idea if anybody in the room has put those two things together, but within the broadcast flag there is language about having, and I forget the exact regulatory words, but basically your home network where you're going to be allowed to share the digital content between the various TVs or whatever it is in your home. And in the future it'll be your TV and your computer all hooked together. There are issues where that's very desirable for ordinary people to be able to see the things in the different devices in their homes, but it's a possible problem for the content owners if you then share it with 1,000 of your best friends who aren't in the home. And so how you draw lines around the castle, how you build the wall around the castle turns out to be important for that regulatory thing. And I didn't know, it's really a question or maybe an issue for you to spot if you haven't, how castle could be a way to implement something the federal government's saying has to be in place in the next couple of years. But I don't know how well it matches up or not, and how well there's been a policy process to think through whether Microsoft's done it in a way that you think is a good way to work with broadcast flag. So that's an
interesting observation. Let's see. I guess the ability to join the castle is entirely at the discretion of the user. The castle is limited to a small number of machines, but serially, lots of people could join. I don't believe that that's a very effective way of propagating music files that you shouldn't be propagating, for example.
If I'm 13, I can give it to one of my friends each day.
Yeah, right.
It's not bad if I have my friends.
But one of the consequences, so and you have to be an administrator to join the castle. So maybe, but if your teenage son is the administrator of your castle, that's not necessarily going to be a barrier. But the other thing which might stop people is that when you join the castle, you essentially make your passwords available to every other member in the castle. So you might make that might make people stop and think twice about.
Some teenagers have engaged in risky activity in the past.
Yes, that's absolutely possible, right?
Your passwords to what?
What does it mean to make passwords available?
Well, the idea about synchronizing the authentication information is that you can now walk to any of the machines in the castle and log into it using the same password.
The password isn't really available, it's just on the machine for purposes of checking.
Yes.
So I'm not making it available, it's that it will respond to the password if you have it.
Correct, but if it's physically on the machine and you're the administrator of the machine, then it's at, let's say it's not directly available, but it's at risk.
Well, you can't recover a password as the administrator, or they're all hashed.
That means I have to run a dictionary attack on it, or use the rainbow tables, right? So as opposed to not having physical access to the password derivative at all, it's significantly risky.
We've wandered far from the question whether the government requirement is going to be met.
Correct.
No geographic limitation on a castle. My castle could include a machine in Tokyo if I wanted.
Or my neighbor's house.
Oh, every machine has a GPS in it. They all have to be within 1 degree of longitude.
Well, I was wondering if it was based on some aspect of.
They'd have to be on.
That might sound bizarre to you, but that could be a requirement.
Yeah, people on vacation they consider part of their work.
Right.
No, but really, so there's no geographical limitations.
No, there isn't.
There's no ownership limitations. So it doesn't. They're just purely whatever
it's opt-in.
machines I want to let on.
Right. It's opt-in.
Quick question. From your presentation, it seems to me, we just can clarify this, it seems to me, although you have this goal, it is totally independent of the hypervisor or the unit project system.
That's correct.
So it is. So you're shipping in May 2006, and is it sort of they are parallel paths, or do you see something from that feeding onto this, or
in the post-Longhorn plans? We see a lot of stuff from that feeding in. The first use of the hypervisor hardware capability is going to be in the secure boot and full volume encryption capability. So we're starting to take advantage of that hardware, but the hypervisor work is on a parallel path and wasn't going to be ready to integrate deeply into the Longhorn plans.
That's a very naive response to the stuff you showed us. All this functionality seems really nice and terrific, and I'm very pleased it's going to be there in Longhorn. I mean, the cynic might say, well, this is all stuff in the main that should have been there years ago.
Sure.
What other stuff is there that should have been there years ago that you're not putting in Longhorn? And have you even thought about that?
We're in fact engaging in an exercise right now that's trying to identify that, and if we come up with things that should go into Longhorn, then we'll try and feed them in. If you want to know my personal opinion at the moment, I think that since we know that we're not going to be perfect, we should have some better mechanisms to recover from not being perfect. For example, I think it would be really great if there were a way to get back to yesterday's or a week ago's state with a press of the button that did not require any significant amount of forethought or planning on the part of the user.
Yeah, that's kind of
right. So that way, if I mean, either accidentally or a virus deletes all my files, or I accidentally delete all my files, I can go back to yesterday and get them back.
Yeah, I mean, that would be terrific. That sounds like quite a sophisticated piece of functionality. But some of the things there, well, maybe they're very hard to implement. But
the interesting thing is we already have an implementation of what's called Shadow File System that would just need to be made available for free on every consumer laptop.
Yeah. I mean, there are things like fiddling around with administrative and user privileges and enabling you to control what gets installed on your machine. This is kind of stuff that is wonderful. It's great that it's going to be there, but I can't help thinking there must be a few other things like this that were put there years ago because nobody cared about security, that now you're having to build in. And it may be quite difficult, but I can't help thinking there must be some other things like that out there that... Or maybe not. Maybe you have thought of everything.
Well, actually, part of the planning process that we're going through, the strategy planning process, is to try and think of everything. Okay, and carefully talk about the high-level goals, what that means in terms of lower-level, next-level goals, what that means in terms of the threats, and try and then make sure that every threat and every problem that in the security space that we've collected from everybody we can talk to can be matched up to one of those threats. And if it doesn't match up to one of those threats, then we add that threat to the list, and that becomes the test of whether or not the architecture that we're designing, or designing might be the wrong way, the architecture that we're making explicit, because I think there's kind of an implicit architecture in all of this all along. But we're going to make it very explicit from now on. That's how we're trying to test that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, to me it was the time travel thing you talked about was interesting in concentrating more on recovery from a problem rather than trying to prevent problems. So, is that serious? Did you consider it and reject it, or is it on a future?
I think people have thought about backup, and they have a couple of implementations and prospective implementations that are happening. For example, the backup technology that they're thinking about is one that's perfect for a small business, and it's completely unattended, and you wouldn't have to think about it for 5 years. I think that's got to be an extra cost product, and therefore it doesn't meet that requirement. But the same technology, if you said it only has to be work for the last 3 months,
right,
and therefore it only needs 10% of my disk, so that's how you meet the commercial requirement of we'd like to make some money off of it when it's really great, but it's available for everybody all the time. It hasn't been rejected yet. This is one of the things I think we're identifying by going through the strategy process that we might be able to do.
Like the cost of ownership thing, clicking on something and then regretting it and trying to figure out what the hell you have to do, right. Making that less expensive, as long as you're going to be dealing with human beings, clients, certainly seems something that would be helpful.
So the project that we're doing to create this strategy, we deliberately called Project Zeno. If you remember, Zeno was the guy who said you can never get from here to there because you have to go halfway, and then you're halfway there, and then you go the next halfway. So it's an explicit recognition of the fact that security is never going to be 100%, and therefore you have to talk about all the things that you can do to cope with the fact that it isn't 100%. And this, I think, is the obvious one.
Good question. In Longhorn, can you visually represent a series of, or a set of services which are absolutely essential for it to maintain its security properties? And then a progressive series of shells which say, well, this is what you get, and these mechanisms and policies are also up and running, and their integrity has been assured.
Depends on how visually there's something we call the security configuration wizard, which we use on servers, because servers are the ones that have the most flexible uses.
Let me paraphrase my question. The reason I'm asking is, long time ago, I had the naive view that there would be an architectural policy determining security, resilience, recovery, and all that. And when I hear the description, I hear lots of policies, mechanisms floating around here and there, and it's getting to be both complicated and extremely fuzzy. So I'm struggling to find a mental architectural picture of what policies are covering what core functionality. What happens if some of the functions that you have implemented actually fail? Is there a core set of features that you're able to ensure integrity in Longhorn and provide a certain minimal level of service associated with it? Sorry if it's a long question.
Right. For sure we don't have a tool that helps you visualize that. All right, so that part. The next question is whether or not, whether or not we can identify, and I don't think we have identified exactly what every single piece of core functionality is. When people talk about there being 100 million lines of code in Longhorn, we don't know what percentage of that is actually in the TCB or what you'd consider to be the the significant parts, security significant parts of the system. Yeah, right. But that's just because you're being Bayesian and it's got to be half.
No. It's because Amitabh, who runs the build process, said that.
It said that it's 52 million. Oh, that's how many million lines there are actually in the product.
Right.
Okay, so we haven't tagged which of those lines of code. If he's got a way of measuring that, maybe we can just declare which one of them are security relevant and quickly and find out. So we don't know which of those 52 million lines of code are actually security relevant. So I think we probably can't answer your question at the moment. And since as part of this strategy process, since a lot of the decisions when it comes down to implementing a strategy and figuring out exactly which technologies we're going to use to implement the architecture, the decision bears on that decision what percentage of the code is security relevant. I think we're going to go find it out.
So corresponding question would be, is there a simple security architecture that derives all your design?
I think you know the answer.
The architecture can be simple at one level, but then it turns out to be recursively applied, and I think that's what we're doing. We've got a fairly simple model of how the system works, but it turns out to be it's applied at the operating system level, and then inside the operating system you can have multiple virtual machines. Inside the virtual machines you have processes. Inside the processes you have CLR application domains, and each of the model applies at each of those levels.
My slogan is security is fractal.
Yes.
Say something about the code signing. As I recall, there's obviously a revocation question that always comes up. And then, as I recall, if you're too draconian about it, then it's hard for programs on a machine to create programs that are run by that machine, or programs to rewrite code and so on. So
the goal. Let me just finish off on your question. I think it would be good to have what you want, and that's part of and that should be integrated into our security strategy process. But it isn't there now. So code integrity, we're only looking at protecting core parts of the operating system. So there is using the software restriction policies. You can apply a policy that only signed code will be loaded of any kind, for all anytime it gets loaded. But what we're really talking about here is making sure that that what we call Windows critical resources are protected. So,
so viruses coming in which aren't signed might still run because they're not perceived as being Windows critical.
Right, they're not. They're if a virus came in and tried to replace the NTOS kernel exe file, that's the core kernel file. It wouldn't be able to. That's a critical resource. It is integrity checked.
Yeah, but if it came in Outlook and you clicked on it and it ran, it would run.
Yes.
Drivers are
unless you and there's an optional policy that you can apply that would say that it has to be signed, and then that implies that you have a corporate administrative infrastructure that has distributed code signing certificates to the machine.
And if I wanted to write a code rewriter that rewrote object codes before they ran, say adding extra checks, that's not something I could do without without Microsoft's cooperation, because that's affecting something that would be signed, right?
If you try to apply it to absolutely everything on the machine, that would be correct.
So two questions. One, to follow on. So drivers are critical and they're always signed. Is that right, or not?
The drivers that we put in the box are critical, and they're always signed. I actually don't know whether or not every single driver in this regime must be signed by somebody you trust.
Well, clearly that can't be a rule for Longhorn. Because people are going to, customers insist on plugging in devices that have drivers that are outside.
So we do have a Windows driver framework that allows user space drivers to exist, and you don't have to be as careful about those because they cannot damage the integrity of the system. And USB device drivers are one of the ones, I believe, that go up there. We'd have to. So one part of the strategy is to make it possible for people to have drivers that aren't so security critical. I believe it's already a policy that you can set that all drivers have to be signed.
Separate technical question. Could you say a bit more about the allowed list and whether there's a separate mechanism or it's integrated with ACLs or how it works?
So the allowed list is more like zones policy than it is like ACLs. Okay, so there is historically and continuing to go forward a different mechanism for describing who you're allowed to reach out and touch than who's allowed to reach in and touch your stuff. ACLs handle the latter, and things like zones policy, where they're completely out of your control. You have no local security identifiers for them. Those are handled usually by having text string symbolic names instead of binary identifiers for them. I think that's the fundamental technical reason why they are handled in a different way. So, for example, the allowed list is likely to be a list of sites to which you will insist that you use SSL to connect and get positive.
These are not allowed list of system calls.
Oh, are you talking about the banned APIs list? No.
No, you're talking about. You said that for Windows services, there will be allowed list that say what actions they can perform.
Oh, sorry. That is done with. There's two different allowed lists, and I misunderstood the one you were talking about. No, that's done with ACLs. The services in Longhorn will have their own security IDs, their own SIDs. Okay, and when we mix lots of services in the same process, that process will act on behalf of all of those IDs. But at least they will not act on behalf of every service, which is the current state of the world. Today they pretty much all run under the same identity.
I see.
And use ACLs to restrict what they can touch locally.
Sneak in a quick question. Do you have any identified degraded modes of operation of Longhorn?
I'm sorry?
Do you have any identified degraded modes of operation of Longhorn?
We have identified degraded
If some policies or some mechanisms have failed, does the system crash or does it?
No. Not that I know of.
Would it be helpful to have?
Well, I guess let me go back. I guess you'd have to say that safe mode is such an identified and implemented degraded mode.
Well, that's from here to here.
Right. You just asked if there were any, and I just said, okay, yes, there is one. So the concept is not entirely foreign. We haven't identified, to my knowledge, any intermediate levels. I don't know. I guess I could conceive of scenarios where that would be valuable, and exactly. And we've been thinking about, shutting down services when, if you know that a particular service has a vulnerability in it that's wormable, then talked about shutting off that one service. And we have dependency information that could tell us what the responses are. But I guess we compute that on demand right now. In other words, if it's necessary to tell people to turn off a service because it's at risk, then we figure out what won't work. It isn't pre-planned, and I think, yes, pre-planning it could make response time to that kind of scenario quicker, so it would be useful. I think I'm out, and the guy with the hook is standing over there to get me out. Thank you.